So starting this list off, in at number 10, we have the creepy animatronics at Chuck E. Cheese. Yeah, apparently these animatronics are scarier than their recycled pizza. The Munch's Make-Believe Band is a group of robots that have been a showstopper at Chuck E. Cheese restaurants since 1989. I didn't know it went back that long.
Come on and sing along with song title. You never can go wrong with song title.
So if you want one last scare, you might need to visit Chuck E. Cheese sooner than later because the company has actually decided to get rid of them for good. Well, you know what? That's probably a smart strategy. Also fix the pizza situation going on there. And I mean, I know that these animatronics have been tormenting and scaring the lives of children for decades, but the company plans on replacing them with updated robots, and you know what? I'm not even mad at that. Climbing up this list, and at number 9, we have E.T.'s friend. If you thought E.T. was scary, I think he was scary when I was younger. Well, you haven't seen anything yet. At Universal Orlando Resort, I dare you to go on the E.T. Adventure ride. Although it's marketed towards children, I guarantee you that you're gonna be freaked out when you're flying by E.T.'s friend. Well, here's a little preview. Well, I've come to accept E.T., but I don't know if I can come to accept his friend. I don't know if I get on board with that one. They're way too terrifying, and to be honest with you guys, they're really creepy, so let's move on. Let's see what else we have on this list. The Little Mermaid swims onto this list at number 8. Disneyland is known for their fully immersive rides and really immersive set designs, but some of their rides are more creepy than magical. Take for example the Little Mermaid ride. The ride follows Ariel through 3 acts, starting with Ariel's world under the sea and goes all the way to the royal wedding celebration, but the Ursula animatronic is what we're talking about right now. She is 7 foot tall, 12 feet wide. Not only does she move super realistically, but sometimes she might even lose her head. Well, take a look at what the heck I'm talking about. Okay, what a poor and unfortunate soul. That was pretty traumatizing if you were a kid and you saw that. Jumping into number 7, we have Jaws. The former Jaws ride at Universal Studios Florida operated for almost 2 decades before it was shut down in 2012 to make way for the wizarding world of Harry Potter, of course. But for those guests who were lucky enough to get onto this ride, they know firsthand how terrifying it would have been to be pursued by a giant great white shark. If you have an irrational fear of sharks, this next clip definitely won't help you guys. Up next, and at number 6, we have the entire It's a Small World, well, the ride. It's one of the most annoying rides. Imagine getting stuck on that. Okay, no, seriously, why is this ride so creepy? I swear the only reason why this ride was created was that parents could force their misbehaved kids to go on it and listen to the song play over and over and over. It almost feels like sometimes this ride is not going to end, and it causes these kids to go insane. Does anyone else find the song to be extremely annoying? Like, not the song itself, but the song played 50 times over and over. And I know it's one of Disney's most iconic rides, but I could definitely do without this one. Actually, my life would feel a lot more complete if they just replaced this ride with something else less annoying. From Georgie to the Laughing Sal jumps in at number 4. This is a 6 foot tall animatronic that was built primarily to attract carnival and amusement park customers into fun houses and dark rides. But I don't know who the heck would want to come face to face with this thing. Her laugh is the creepiest thing I've ever heard. I'm almost 30 years old and this thing still creeps me out. We need to douse her in some holy water and say some prayers because this thing must be possessed. Number 3, the Ronald McDonald Animatronic Show. Ronald McDonald is creepy enough as it is, and I don't know why. It's the whole clown thing and who's under the mask. Well, we definitely don't need an animatronic version of him. I bet those McDonald's that had this animatronic saw a heavy dip in sales because people would purposely avoid getting their Big Macs from that location because you have to go through him first. And honestly, I don't blame them. They probably betrayed McDonald's and went to the nearest Burger King instead.
Different than the ones we
You should be happy that I only showed you a small clip because this thing is pretty creepy. Apparently there was a button that you can push and he would just constantly sing and dance. Thankfully there aren't any more of these creepy Ronald McDonalds, and for that I think the world is a better and safer place. Bringing us into number 2, we have this creepy clown. Is this real life right now? This is not okay. How does something like this actually exist? I don't know. You know what we should do? We should petition this to have this thing burned down immediately. Let's not waste any time here. I honestly don't know what kid would want to see this thing in person. If you didn't have a fear of clowns before, well, you probably do now. I couldn't find a video of this clown in action, and you know what? I'm actually pretty glad about that. You're welcome. So now you don't have to face the fact that I almost traumatized you with that one. So from there, let's move on to the original Chuck E. Cheese animatronic doll. So this tops our list in at number 1. We've seen real life looking sharks, we've seen some E.T.'s creepy friends, but none of that will prepare you for this Chuck E. Cheese robotic doll. You can't say that I didn't warn you. Whoever made this thing must have hated children. I literally feel like he's looking right into my soul. Kids probably used to hide underneath the tables when the lights turned off because they wouldn't dare look into his eyes. Nothing good ever came from watching this performance. Mostly just nightmares.
Starting off at number 10 now, we have the serial killer. Yes, we are starting off with a very intense one right away. This one comes from Reddit user Archimedes, who said, "We had a serial killer in South Carolina a couple of years ago. No one knew what he looked like yet, but he had already killed 3 people at this point. Well, my granny has lived alone since my granddad passed about 15 years ago. She lived at the end of a long dirt road with about 10 other families, but the closest one was about a quarter of a mile up the road. One afternoon, some random guy comes knocking on the front door of her house. My granny is a practical woman. She has never been to school because she grew up on a farm and was expected to pull her weight, but she is a smart woman. She goes to her glass front door but doesn't open it. The 40-ish-year-old man is there asking if he can use a phone since his car broke down. Granny doesn't like the look of this guy. He doesn't live here. If he doesn't live here, there is no reason for him to be on this road, and if he was visiting someone, their house or anyone else's house would have been closer since she lives on a dead end. Anyway, she tells him that no, he can't use the phone and he needs to leave. She backs up and picks up my granddad's 410 as she goes. Once he sees the shotgun, he hightails it out of there. About a week later, the cops finally catch the serial killer, and lo and behold, it isn't the same damn man. Next up at number 9 now, we have the tornado. This is a short one that came from Reddit user Telegraph Kiss. They said, "I worked at a hospital PRN and frequently picked up extra shifts. I worked overnights and had asked the supervisor to go ahead and put me down to work the next night. Well, as the night went on, I just felt awful, like completely doomed. I had never wanted so badly to be home. I lived an hour away from my job. So by the morning, I called the supervisor and asked her to remove me from the schedule. So I went home feeling unexplainably scared. By the time I woke up, I was getting calls that an EF5 tornado had hit the town I worked in and the hospital I worked at. I found that one really interesting. They say that animals can sense impending natural disasters. Do you think humans can sort of tap into that ability as well? Moving on to number 8 now, we have helping a friend. This one came from Reddit user Calamity H. Jane. Their story sounds like it's come straight out of a gangster movie. Now that might sound cool, but how would you like to be in this situation? They said, "A few years ago, about 1 AM on a Sunday morning, I had to take my dog out before bed. I lived in a rough neighborhood, and I am a female, so I usually have my guard up regardless of the time. Before I left the apartment building, my gut told me something was up. The street was completely void of traffic and people, except for a van parked out to the side of the road. Outside of it were 3 people who I quickly identified as male. Right away, my reaction was to keep my head low, put my jacket hood up, and not bring attention to myself. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see they were struggling. On closer inspection, I see 2 of the men are holding up the other man between them. I make the assumption that they are just headed home after a night of heavy partying and they are just helping their friend get sick or something. I am telling myself this to ease my fears. Then they notice me and they stop everything and freeze. I thought this was odd and not good, so I dragged my dog straight back to the building. I don't even know if he got the chance to pee that night. I go to bed thinking nothing more of it, until it's time to take the dog out again in the morning. There was a notice in the elevator asking for witnesses as to exactly what I saw that evening because a dead body had been found. So this wasn't a friend of theirs after all, they were ditching a body. It still upsets me to this day, and I'll never ignore my intuition again. Next up at number 7 now, we have Katrina. This one came from Chanel number 5 on Reddit. This is a story that is very personal to them, but people all over the world will know what the event they're talking about is. They said, I've lived in South Louisiana my entire life, about an hour south of New Orleans. In July 2005, I was only 11 years old, I kept having this reoccurring nightmare of me lying in my backyard, staring at the sky, and suddenly a large brown wave of water, probably 30 feet high, came up and washed my entire neighborhood away. It would always end right after the wave crashed and I would wake up. Then Hurricane Katrina hit a month later. My hometown was out of power for 2 weeks, but thankfully no flooding. But then I had the same dream after Katrina hit, except I saw the aftermath. I kept seeing dead animals floating past me as I tried to swim to my house. When I woke up, I had this horrible feeling that something horrible was going to happen to us. Hurricane Rita was making landfall and we were waiting it out at my house. I kept telling my mom that I wanted to go to my aunt's house, which was in the parish north of us. She said no and told me to go back to sleep. About an hour later, the levees in my town broke and our entire town had an hour to evacuate. Most of our parish was under 6 feet of water. I lost 2 classmates and 6 family members. When we came back about a week later, everything was coated in mud. There were dozens of dead animals all over the road. Most of us were homeless for years after, but at least we were alive. So now when I tell my mom something is up, she listens. Next up at number 6 now, we have 9/10. For those of you that are old enough to remember 9/11, it was a day many people will never forget. But how many people remember the day before? I guess that would be called 9/10. One Reddit user does, and here is why. They said, true story, I was a freshman in high school when 9/11 happened and was kind of a worrywart. I'd always watch the news and read the newspapers and had a solid understanding of who bin Laden was and what his goal was. I remember on 9/10 around 11 AM I got a really bad feeling in my mind and went to the nurse's office. I called my mom and told her I wasn't feeling well and needed to get sent home from school. She was busy working and couldn't come get me, but said she would ask my grandfather if he could. He agreed and showed up within 30 minutes. When I got into his car, he looked at me and said, "You look fine." We talked for a good portion of the ride home, and at some point I remember saying to him I thought tomorrow was going to be the day the world ended. I believed wholeheartedly we were going to be attacked on a massive scale. I'm talking nukes and all of that. Obviously it wasn't that drastic, but still the next day was 9/11, and I'll never forget the feeling in my stomach during third period when my principal pulled my teacher from the classroom and she came back in and turned the TV on to see the first tower smoking. Haunting. Moving on to number 5 now, we have The Snatcher. This one comes from Reddit user Apple Bliss. Great name. They share a story that is every parent's worst nightmare, but luckily kids can sometimes have a strange intuition. Apple Bliss said, I think a gut feeling led to me not being kidnapped. I was maybe 9 at the time. I was in a department store wandering on my own when all of a sudden the most terrible gut-wrenching feeling came over me. I don't know how, but I knew I had to get back to my mom. I ran to the aisle she was in. A man hurriedly followed me into the aisle. When he saw I was with my mother, he stood there for a few seconds and stared at me before walking away. I will never forget that feeling or his terrifying face. Moving on to number 4 now, we have The Warning. This one came from Reddit user Belosi Dapper. I think this one would be scary just by itself, but the gut feeling makes it even better. They said when I was about 12 years old, I had a nightmare one night that I could see my identical twin sister standing outside of the porch, waving her arms at me as if to dissuade me from coming outside. She looked dead and was lit up by this eerie green light. It was so scary that I can still see it vividly in my mind today. When I woke up, my heart was thudding in my chest. Normally when I had a nightmare, and I often did as a kid, I would go wake up my stepmom who would take me downstairs and make me some cocoa, and we would sit at the kitchen table and talk about it until I felt better. That night, for some reason, I stayed put in my bed and couldn't bring myself to wake her up. The next morning we were awoken to shouting downstairs. A man who was drunk or stoned or something had broken into our back porch. The porch connected to the kitchen where I would have been with my stepmom. He stripped down naked inside the porch, messed with some of my dad's tools, and then at daybreak had gone outside when he heard our neighbor lady hauling her trash to the curb. She thought it was my father and had called out to him, at which point he'd gone after her. Police were called and he was taken away. There were all kinds of hunting supplies, tools on that back porch, including a hatchet. I shudder to think what would have happened if we'd wandered downstairs in our nightgowns and he'd been just on the other side of a pane of glass. Thanks sis. Next up, number 3 now, we have hanging knives. This one comes from Reddit user Deacon Nunu, who said he used to work as a security guard at a dormitory that used to be an old hotel. He prided himself on going down every dark hallway alone and leaving no stone unturned. He said, "One night I got to the double doors that went to a particularly dark hallway leading to the back entrance to the kitchen and I froze. No, I said to myself, I'm not going down there tonight." This was extremely out of character for me. I had no idea what would cause me to all of a sudden have so strong an urge to stay out of there, but it was like really strong, so I went with my gut. I was kind of embarrassed about it and didn't tell anyone. That night, at that exact same time, there was a strung out addict robbing the kitchen, and there were really sharp, gigantic cheese knives hanging all over the place, just in case he didn't have his own weapon. I'm pretty sure he would have attacked me as the only witness had I gone down there that night. Who knows who would have come out on top, but I like to think that something saved me that night. But if it was my subconscious, how did it assess that there was someone down there before I even opened up the doors? Moving on to number 2 now, we have the detector. This one comes from Roscoe Cracks Corn, and it's a reminder that you should always check your smoke detector. Seriously, like after this video, go and check yours, or ask your parents to. This story is a good reminder why. They said, "I was driving home from work one afternoon and was troubled by the thought it would be horrible if I turned the corner and found my house was on fire. I got home and my house was fine, but that afternoon I thought I need to check the smoke detector. I'd moved in a year and a half before and hadn't ever checked the smoke detector. I bought a couple of batteries a few days later with the intention of putting them in, but noticed the detector looked different than the usual battery operated ones I was accustomed to seeing. I didn't get around to actually checking it though. I mentioned it to my friend who said he'd get a ladder and help me check it. We didn't get round to that either. A few days later, I was awakened by my smoke detector at 4 AM. My house was burning. I got my kids out and my parrot with only my bathrobe on. It turned out that my smoke detector was hardwired. I'm alive only because of that. It was arson as well. No one was ever arrested." And finally, number 1 now, we have name and birthday. I had to put this story at the number 1 spot because it's scary, but also I have so much respect for the storyteller and their friend. You're about to see why. Their Reddit username is gmoney5786. They said, "When I was in university, I was walking home from the bars in the Bywood Market in Ottawa with my roommate at the time. It was about 2:30 AM and we were looking forward to getting home and ordering some pizza when we came across 2 guys and a very drunk girl. Initially, we didn't think anything about it because it was a pretty common sight on a Friday, but as we walked behind them for a few minutes, we noticed how out of it she was. One of the guys was essentially carrying her and her clutch bag was loosely dangling from her limp wrist. Our street came up, but instead of turning down it, we decided to see what was going on. The guys explained that she was one of their girlfriends and had too much to drink, so they were taking her home. We asked them a few more questions: what bar they were at, where she lived, if she was an Ottawa University student, etc. They gave pretty convincing answers, but all seemed very uncomfortable and wanted us to go away. During the conversation, the guy holding his girlfriend shifted her position to get a better grip, which caused her arm to dangle down and drop her clutch. Before they could move, my roommate grabbed the clutch and took her ID. My roommate then asked if they knew her first and last name along with her birthday. This is where things changed. The other guy got really aggressive and confrontational, while the other went silent. They didn't know her name or her birthday. I then pulled out my phone and called the police. The guy dropped her and they took off running. We waited with her for about 10 minutes until the police and EMS got there. We gave a statement but did not have much to go on other than their descriptions. Police told us they suspected she had been dosed and that she was lucky we happened to be walking behind her. Pretty scary stuff. Starting off at number 10 now, we have Cropsey. Some of you guys may have heard me talk about this one before. It's the story of the boogeyman of Staten Island. He was rumored to be a homicidal maniac who escaped from a mental asylum. He would hunt for children and drag them back to the ruins of a hospital where he lived. Witnesses always said that he had a hook for a hand. These stories were meant to scare kids, perhaps even told to them by their own parents who wanted them to be more wary of strangers. Then, in 1972, the boogeyman became real. News broke of a real-life corpsey man called Andre Rand. He was a former janitor at the local school for mentally disabled children. Rand was arrested in connection connection with the disappearance of Jennifer Schweiger, a 12-year-old girl with Down syndrome. He lost his job over the case and moved into the now abandoned school that he used to work in. He was eventually convicted of, and police connected him to the disappearance of 4 other children. No bodies were ever recovered. Moving on now to number 9, guys, we have the Bunny Man. I talked about this legend in my West Virginia video, if you remember. The story goes that in 1904 a mental asylum closed down. While transferring inmates to a new facility, one of the buses crashed. Most of the people in it were killed or captured trying to escape, but one actually did escape, known as the Bunny Man. He would then roam the land, hunting rabbits and then leaving their half-eaten carcasses for the locals to find. Sometimes they will be hanging from a tree or a bridge. Although there are parts of the story that just don't add up, something strange happened in 1970. A couple driving their car at night had an axe thrown through their window by a man in a bunny suit. 2 weeks later, another man found an axe-wielding guy in a bunny suit chopping wood nearby who was gone by the time police arrived. Are these linked together somehow? Is there more truth to this than meets the eye? Moving on now to number 8, we have the body under the bed. Ever since hotels and motels have become a common part of society, people have swapped stories about guests who discovered that the mattress they were sleeping on was either above or even stuffed with the body of a murder victim. A grisly tale for sure, but one that was confined to the realms of myths and legend. Then, in 1999, a case in Colorado occurred involving a couple who slept on a mattress containing a body. The police kept the details of that close to their chest, but in 2010, a huge story broke when guests at a Memphis motel discovered they had been sleeping above the body of Sony Millbrook, a missing person at the time. Her boyfriend, Lakeith Moody, was convicted of the crime. Many people were horrified and vowed to give their hotel beds a closer inspection next time. Next up at number 7 now, guys, we have the Maine Robber. That's M-A-I-N-E. The state. For many years, visitors to Maine's North Pond have reported that something strange was going on there. Time after time, people reported that things were going missing. Not just one person, one time, many people, many times. Batteries and food would vanish from cabins, while flashlights just disappeared from camping tents. People thought either the earth itself was swallowing it all up, or there was a thief at work. It turns out they were right about that. In 2013, a game warden discovered Christopher Knight living alone in the woods. For 27 years, this man had been there watching hikers, canoeists and other visitors to the area. When taken in for questioning, Knight admitted that he was responsible for around 40 robberies a year. I mean, stealing batteries is one thing, but I feel like if you were being watched all those years and then you were proven right about it, that would be even creepier. At the number 6 spot now, we have the Falling Lawyer. Now, I've lived in Toronto for quite a few years now, and I've personally heard this story floating around the place, but I never thought it was actually true until now. They say that years ago there was a lawyer who loved to show off how strong his office windows were in his building that overlooked the city. Every time someone came to visit, he would take a long run up, jump, and hurl himself right into the window. Sure enough, the window would remain intact, although we'll never know if this actually impressed his visitors. Well, this lawyer was real, and his name was Gary Hoy. He was a senior partner at his firm with an office on the 24th floor. On July 9th, 1993, some law students came to visit. He took his usual leap at the window, but this time, after years of it being weakened, it smashed. Gary plummeted to his death, and the improbable story became somewhat of a local legend. Next up at number 5 now, we have the Puebla's secrets. For many years, longer than people can even remember, the people of Puebla in Mexico have talked about the tunnels. Secret tunnels that were built under their city by the Spanish conquistadors in the 1500s. It's been almost half a millennia since then, and the stories became legend. People looked for them, but they found nothing. The tunnels became a myth, something to scare the kids into believing there was a dark maze of caverns beneath them. In 2014, construction workers were in the middle of an urban remodeling project when they stumbled upon an old tunnel. Surely the legends weren't true. The Puebla History Center took over the site to investigate, and yes, it was the fabled tunnels people had spoken about. They determined the tunnels were built in 1531, right after the city was founded. Members of the Catholic Church supposedly used the tunnels to transport treasure and other property in and out of the city without people knowing about it. Parts of the tunnels are now open to the public, giving you the chance to walk through the dark halls of an urban legend that came true. Coming in at number 4 now, guys, we have the alligators. I definitely talked about this one in our New York Urban Legends video. Many years ago in New York, people would say that there were alligators in the sewers below the city. They said a young boy once flushed his pet alligator down the toilet. Years later, he reached into the sewer grate to retrieve a lost baseball. At that moment, a fully grown alligator leapt up from below and ripped his arm clean off, the same alligator he had flushed away. Many people dismissed the whole story. Alligators, New York, crazy. However, in 1959, Teddy May, the commissioner of New York during the time of these rumors, wrote about the alligators in his tell-all book. He said that he and his inspectors did find alligators in the New York sewers in 1935. They were up to 2 feet in size. It took 2 years for them to clear them all out, more than enough time for the facts to get blurred with fiction. Moving on to number 3 now, we have the Dog Boy. For many people in Arkansas, they know the stories of the Dog Boy. Kids swap tales of a werewolf-like man who roams around the town of Quitman. Some even say they've seen him. Many of them might not know that the story is somewhat based in real life. Gerald Bettis was born in Quitman in 1954. By the time he was a young boy, the neighbors were already calling him evil. They said he liked to capture stray animals and torture them in twisted experiments. As he got older, he turned on his parents, tormenting them until, at the age of 27, his dead father was found in his home. The newspapers said it was illness, but others said it was Beres then kept his mother in the house until she was finally taken away and placed in protective custody. His mother testified against him and he was given life in prison, where he died a few years later. They say that his spirit still haunts that house and that he's often seen roaming the area as a ghost on all fours with shaggy hair like a dog. At the number 2 spot now, guys, we have Charlie No Face. Some of you may have heard me talk about this one in my Pennsylvanian video. Charlie No Face is the story of a boy called Charlie who once got electrocuted while climbing on an electric pole to try and see into a bird's nest. He was horrifically disfigured. His face had practically melted off. Eyes, nose, mouth, one of his ears and one of his arms all completely gone. It also turned his skin a sickly green. Somehow he survived and lived out his life in the small town, rarely showing his face to the other locals. People would share the story of Charlie No Face, but because nobody saw him, the story became nothing more than an urban legend. But it wasn't. The story was actually true, all except for the name. Charlie's real name was Raymond Robinson. He was friendly to people whenever they saw him, and he wasn't responsible for the many hauntings that became associated with the legend. And finally, number 1 now, we have Polybius. You may remember this from my video game Urban Legends video. Polybius was the name of an arcade game which kids in Portland got addicted to in 1981. Whenever they were forced off it, they felt nauseous, stressed, or even had seizures. Some people noticed the game was being serviced a lot more than usual. Instead of once a month, Polybius was being checked by men in black suits every single week. They would copy its hard drive, leave all of the money, and then be gone until the next week. People believed they were from the CIA and that Polybius was all part of a mind control program that sent subliminal messages to its players. While a lot of this is debatable, there really was a kid who got sick during an arcade marathon contest in Portland in 1981. A few days after that, federal agents really did seize a load of arcade cabinets. They said it was all part of a major gambling bust. This is where people tend to differ in opinion. Some say that the story of Polybius was inspired by the events, others say the events are proof of the story.